1.2a, X and Y intercepts. Definitely not a brand new concept overall for you. All right, so intercepts in general are points where a graph intersects the X or Y axis. Here's where you might need to remind yourself of stuff so you don't get things backwards. An X-intercept occurs where Y equals 0, and a Y-intercept occurs where X equals 0. A function can have 0 plus X-intercepts, but at most 1 Y-intercept. If it has more than 1 Y-intercept, then it's not a function. Okay? Oh, also, on the calendar, there's a quiz tomorrow over domain and range. Interval notation. Make sure you can do it. Least to greatest, bottom to top, left to right. Okay? Domain and range. Yes. And whether or not something is a function. Okay, so on this graph here, you can see that you have X-intercepts, because that's where it crosses the X-axis, Y-intercept, where it crosses the Y-axis. Domain and range was what did we do? It was when I wasn't here. It was Tuesday. It was the Mrs. Archer's video. Yeah, that's what it was. All right, we get on what an X and Y-intercept is, right? Knocking the cobwebs off. All right, next slide. Let's look at these examples here. Here's the important thing, and because this isn't brand new, you know what X and Y intercepts are for a very long time. We have to make sure that we can express our answers in the right way. So intercepts in general, intercepts are always ordered pairs. So if I have an X-intercept, tell me some other names for X-intercepts. I can call them X-intercepts. What else could I call them? Do you remember? Zeros. Does that sound familiar? X-intercepts are zeros, solutions, roots. Those are all the same thing. Okay, but you express your answer in a different way depending on which one of those you're actually referring to. So even though they refer to the same point on the graph, they're kind of different things specifically. So since it says X and Y intercepts, our answers have to be in ordered pairs and not in a set of numbers. So my X-intercepts here, look at number 1. Does this function cross the X-axis at all? No. X-axis is right here, so this is none. Your X-axis, or your Y-axis is the long axis, right? Then my Y-intercept looks like it's right there, so that's at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. So it is at 0, 5. Don't get them backwards like 5, 0. It's a Y-intercept. X is 0. Y has a value. Okay. On number 2, how many X-intercepts do I have? I have 1. It's right here. And 1, 2, 3. Is that at 4? So this is at 4, 0. Y is 0 when you have an X-intercept. And then my Y-intercept is at what? 0, 2? 0, 2. Sorry, I know they're kind of small. All right, so look at number 3. How many X-intercepts do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so if I have more than 1, I usually mark them on there so I don't miss one. I have 4 of them. That's where they are. Those are the points I need to name. So this is X-intercepts. I have 1 at -1, 0. Now, these are not intervals, so there's no union. It's just a comma because it's a list of ordered pairs. -1, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, and 3, 0. And so at this point, it might be not better to be able to express my answer differently instead of X-intercepts, but we'll get to the zeros here in just a second. If you zoom out and then zoom back in, I think you should have some room, like you might have to write it underneath it or whatever, but I think it gives you more room to write, if that makes any sense. Y'all are getting better at this, right? I know it's still not ideal, but you're getting better at it. I can tell when I'm looking at handwriting and stuff too, getting the hang of it. All right, Y-intercept, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is at 0, 6. All right. So then if I look at number 4, what does this graph have that's not actually drawn on my graph? Do you know what they're called? There's a line right here. What are these lines called? Asymptotes. Although, if you listen to Ms. Archer's video, she says asymptotes, which is hilarious and totally wrong, but it's an asymptote. It's okay. We make fun of her and she doesn't change it. It's fine. So I have an asymptote here and I have an asymptote here. Okay? That means that that graph is not going to cross those. So then my x-intercepts, so does this graph cross the y-axis? I'm sorry, the x-axis? No. Does it cross the y-axis? No. So this doesn't have either one. So this is none and none. Okay. We good? All right. So then you can move on. Let's talk about zeros. So our x-intercept, so the zeros just right here, these 4 points that I plotted, those are my zeros and they're my x-intercepts. But again, they're not exactly the same thing. So the definition of zeros isn't, oh, it's the x-intercepts. The definition of my zeros is that these are the x values where the function intersects the x-axis. Okay? The x values where the function intersects the x-axis. So it's not an ordered pair. It's just the x values. So this is when we write them in a set. So if you're asked for the intercepts, you write it as an ordered pair. If you're asked for the zeros, you write it as a set of numbers. Okay? But they're still literally the exact same things that you're finding. Okay? When you want to find them from an equation and not picking them off a graph, so to find the zeros, we set f of x, whatever our function is, equal to 0 and solve for x. Because guess what? Your x-intercepts or your zeros, that's when y equals 0, and that's what f of x is. When I want to find the y-intercept, I find f of 0. I just substitute 0 in for x, figure out my y. It's that simple. Okay. So, any questions at this point? All right, let's look at number 7. I won't scroll yet. It's on the same page for you, right? Okay. All right, so I want to find the zeros and the y-intercept. So there's 2 separate things that we're doing here. To find the zeros, I set f of x equal to 0. So where f of x is, it becomes 0. 0 equals negative absolute value of x minus 5 plus 3. All right. So I'm solving an absolute value, which, holy cow, on the test, did y'all make up some math? Those are not parentheses, people. So I'm going to take this whole chunk here, and I'm going to move, because this is all just one term right now. I'm going to move it to the right. I'm going to add it to the left over here, so that becomes positive. So now I have absolute value of x minus 5 equals 3. Now, I have to set up 2 equations to solve, right? The first one is just whatever's in there, so just x minus 5 equals 3. And then the second one is negative x minus 5 equals 3. And then I solve both of those. So when I solve this one, I add 5 to both sides, and I get x equals 8. When I solve this one, I can just multiply both sides by a negative, or I can distribute. It doesn't really matter. Let's just multiply both sides by a negative. So I get x minus 5 equals negative 3. So then x equals 2. So I have 2 x values that I got. If this had said, what are the x-intercepts, I would write those as ordered pairs. 2, 0, 8, 0, but that's not what it said. It said the zeros. So that's when you put it in a set with the squiggly brackets, and we have 2, 8. Those are my zeros. Those are the x values where we cross the x-axis. Because right here, I added 5 to both sides. Did I do that right? Okay. Double check me, because you never know. All right, we all okay with that? So now I need to find the y-intercept. Y-intercept is when x equals 0. So if I find f of 0, I'm just going to substitute 0 in everywhere there's an x. So it's negative absolute value of 0 minus 5 plus 3. Then I have to take care of my absolute value. The absolute value of negative 5 is a positive 5, but then I have to multiply it by this negative 1, so I still get negative 5 plus 3, so I get f of 0 equals negative 2. My y-intercept, intercept has to be done as an ordered pair. It's a y-intercept, x is 0, y is negative 2. That's what it looks like. Okay. What questions do you have? This one? Okay, so I substituted 0 in. Does that part make sense? Okay, so 0 minus 5 is a negative 5. When you take the absolute value of a number, it makes a positive, right? So once I take the absolute value, it's a positive 5. But there was a negative out front, which turns it back negative again. And then I add it to 3, and that's how I get negative 2. Does that help? Okay, good. What else we got? You good on everything else? All right. So let's look at this next one. I'm usually in here by 6:45. Okay. So I'm going to find the zeros in the y-intercept. So to find the zeros, I set f of x equal to 0. So 0 equals 2x squared minus 7x minus 4. I'm solving a quadratic, so I'm going to factor. Lord help us all. Some of you really, really need to go back and practice factoring like a lot more. So a is not 1, which means I'm going to multiply 2 times a negative 4, and that's going to give me a negative 8. I need two numbers that multiply to give me a negative 8 and add to give me a negative 7. So my numbers are going to be negative 8 and a positive 1, because those will multiply to give me a negative 8, combine to give me a negative 7. Once I have figured those out, I don't make parentheses, okay? This is equal to, I split this middle term, 2x squared minus 8x plus x minus 4. Everybody with me so far? Okay. So then I'm going to factor by grouping. I group these first two together. I group the second two together. Factor out the GCF in this one. That is a 2x. That leaves me with x minus 4. I factor the GCF out of these two. There isn't one, so it's just 1 times x minus 4. And remember, what's inside those parentheses should match every time. Now that I'm at this step, I'm still not finished factoring. This gives me x minus 4 times 2x plus 1. Okay, we have factored. This is why we went over factoring so much, and you're going to have to factor in pretty much everything we do. So now that I have it factored, this time we're actually solving because I want to get my zeros. You use your zero product rule, and you take each one of these and set them equal to 0. X minus 4 equals 0, and 2x plus 1 equals 0. So that gives me x equals 4, and then I get 2x equals negative 1, so x equals negative 1/2. Those are my 2x values. Then they're the zeros, so they don't go in an ordered pair, but you do always put them in order from least to greatest. So I'd have a negative 1/2 and 4. What questions do you have at this point? We're all good so far? Okay. So then I need my y-intercept. That means I find f of 0. So that's equal to 2 times 0 squared minus 7 times 0 minus 4. So this gives me 0, this gives me 0. F of 0 equals negative 4. 0, negative 4. Now, when we did the absolute value one, we had to substitute in 0 for x and do some work to solve that. But here, did I really need to actually substitute it in? If you think about substituting it in, if you make the x 0, that zeroes this term out, that zeroes this term out, all you're left with is the negative 4. So when it's a polynomial, it's a little easy. It's just the constant term. Okay. What questions do we have? We good? What's wrong? I'm sorry, please don't break your phone. So what? The second part, explain it one more time. So what you said? Okay. So did you, well, so I just substituted in 0. So did this part make sense? I substituted in 0 everywhere there was an x. And those zeroed out, and then I'm left with a negative 4. Because 0 times 2 is 0. 0 times 7 is 0. So that's why I'm just left with that. So even with that before, like, so if we look at this one, so we'll just do the y-intercept first on this one. So I could actually substitute them in. That's totally fine. But here, if I substitute in a 0 here, that's going to 0 out. 0 here, that's going to 0 out. All I'm left with is 4. So the y-intercept's actually very easy. It's just 0, 4. And on these particular ones, it doesn't require any work. Does that make sense to you? Does that make sense? Like on the absolute value one, we had to because it didn't work that way. But on these, it's working that way. All right, so we still need to do the other. 0 equals x to the 4th minus 5x squared plus 4. I'm going to need to factor again. Do I freak out because it's x to the 4th? No. It's 3 terms. It's set up like a quadratic. I factor like a quadratic. You do not have to do grouping if a is 1. I think that complicates it for a lot of you, and that's where you get confused and lost. A is 1, so I'm not going to do any kind of grouping. If A is 1, I can jump to parentheses in my next step. Not if it's not 1, but if it's 1, I'm good. So I need 2 numbers that are going to multiply to give me 4 and add to give me a negative 5. And here's what we know to help us with the numbers. First of all, if this is x to the 4th, this has to be x squared and x squared. The second thing is if this is positive, these two signs have to be the same. And so since this is negative, they're both negative. So what are 2 numbers that are going to multiply to give me 4 and combine to give me negative 5? Negative 4 and negative 1. Good. So negative 4 and negative 1. Can I factor more here? Well, the x squared isn't negative. It's x squared minus 4 and x squared minus 1. Okay. Can I factor some more? What type of situation is this? What are these called? Yeah, they are perfect squares, so it's a difference of squares, right? So that means that this x minus 4 can very easily become x plus 2, x minus 2, and the x squared minus 1 is x plus 1, x minus 1. Difference of squares, it's going to come up a lot. It's easy, it's going to come up a lot, so make sure you can recognize it and use it. So now that I'm here, I have 4 factors. So I do x plus 2 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. So I get x equals negative 2, x equals 2, x equals negative 1, and x equals 1. There's more than one way you can express your answer here. So one way is to go ahead and list them out, least to greatest. So I got negative 2, negative 1, 1, and 2, because I have 4 zeros. Or, because you do have a negative and positive 2 and a negative and positive 1, you could say plus or minus 1 and plus or minus 2. Both of them are fine. It doesn't matter either way. Delta Math would take it either way. And just, what am I trying to say? Just make sure when you're reading it, you know what it means too. Okay? Are we all good so far? Yes, like it should be a special, anytime you need it, there's usually like a little special character. It's like there for you to use if you want to use it. So whether you use it or not, it's fine. Like it would take it either way. There'll be times sometimes when we have to list out a ton of stuff and you kind of want to use plus or minus just because it'll make your own life easier. But sometimes I start listing out and I don't even realize I have that. And then I'm like, I'm not rewriting it. It's fine. Either way, whatever. Okay. Any questions at all? All right, I'm going to start number 10 with you, and then I'm going to see if you can finish this up. So I want the zeros. That means I set f of x equal to 0. So 0 equals x cubed minus 6x squared minus 7x. When you factor, what's the first thing you always look for? Has 3 letters. GCF. So what's the GCF here? Or is there one, first of all? X. I can take the x out, right? So this 0 equals x times x squared minus 6x minus 7. And don't drop him off because he's important. And then now I need to factor this. Okay, so I want you to try and factor this. See if you can solve it. See if you can find your zeros. I'll give you some time to think and process all that. Okay, so I'm going to leave this here. Okay, and then, so you said you got the numbers, but you forgot what to do with them. So what are your numbers? Okay, good. So those are the numbers, -7 and a +1. So since A is 1 right here, you can jump to this right here. Okay, I know that this is x and this is x. This is negative, so the signs are opposite. And then once you figure out your numbers, you just drop them into place. The signs are already there. -7, +1. Does that make sense? So that the toughest part is coming up with the numbers most of the time. And knowing that you can't jump to this step if, so look up here just real quick. On this one, notice after I came up with my numbers, there was no parentheses. If A is not 1, you have to split that middle term. If A is 1, then you can jump to the parentheses and you don't have to do grouping because you'll get the same answer either way, okay? So then here, when I have to actually find my zeros, how many factors do I have? 3. Don't forget this guy. The very first day of Algebra 2 when I was in high school, my teacher, she was kooky but amazing. And she came in dressed as the number 0, and she did this whole skit about how 0 is important and you can't forget it and whatnot. And I think of her every time something like this comes up. So I've got 3 things here. So I've got x equals 0. I've got x plus 1 equals 0, and I have x minus 7 equals 0. Now, if I had factored out a 5, like if this was a 5 and not an x, then nothing would work. It's only if there's a variable here. Okay, so here, that is one of my zeros. Then I get x equals -1 and x equals 7. Then I put them in here from least to greatest, so -1, 0, 7. Then what do you think my y-intercept is? How do you find it? You do f of 0, right? It's 0, because if I substitute 0 in here, this zero's out, this zero's out, this zero's out, it's 0, 0. And here's another little hint. If one of your x-intercepts is 0, then your y-intercept has to be 0, 0. That'll happen every time, okay? If one of your x-intercepts is 0, then your y-intercept will be 0 every time. And if you know your y-intercept is 0, then at least one of your x-intercepts has to be 0, okay? We good? What questions you got? You can do this? You can do this. But you have to be able to factor. I cannot stress this enough. It's not something you can think you can ignore and it'll go away, because it will not, and it will cause you to continually get stuff wrong, and I don't want that to happen to you, okay? Okay, so actually today, no.